It was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The city outside was quiet, covered in the soft echo of rain. Streetlights painted small golden pools on the wet pavement, and the air smelled like coffee and night. I had been walking for hours, thinking about nothing in particular, or maybe about everything at once, and that's when I saw it. A small sign glowing under the rain, the coffee shop, open all night. It didn't look like a place that should be open. The lights were warm, but not too bright. A little jazz melody floated from inside, the kind that makes you feel both calm and a bit nostalgic. I hesitated for a second, then pushed the door open. The bell above the door gave a gentle sound. Ting. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. The room wasn't big, just 5 or 6 tables, a counter, and an old radio in the corner. A man was sitting by the window reading a newspaper. An old couple shared a slice of cake, whispering quietly, and behind the counter stood a barista. A woman with dark hair tied in a bun, her eyes calm but awake. "Good evening," she said, smiling slightly. I looked at the clock on the wall. Or maybe I should say, "Good morning," I answered, half joking. She laughed softly. "Here, it's always evening," she said. "What can I get you?" I looked at the board above the counter. Handwritten chalk letters, slightly smudged. Espresso, Americano, latte. Mocha, midnight blend. "What's the midnight blend?" I asked. She leaned closer, as if it were a secret. "It's what people drink when they don't know why they're awake." That made me smile. "Then that's exactly what I need." She nodded, turned around and started making the coffee. The sound of the espresso machine filled the silence. Hiss, drip, hiss. And for some reason, it felt comforting. I sat down at the counter. Behind her, shelves were filled with books, jars of coffee beans, and small glowing candles. The whole place felt like a dream, or like a memory I couldn't quite remember. When she placed the cup in front of me, I noticed the steam rising slowly, dancing in the warm light. "So," she said, cleaning the counter. "First time here?" "Yeah," I said. "I was just walking, and I saw the sign." She nodded. "Most people who come here aren't really looking for it. The café finds them instead." I didn't understand what she meant, but I didn't ask. The coffee was smooth, deep, a little bitter, perfect for the hour. We stayed quiet for a moment, only the sound of jazz and rain outside. Then the door opened again. A man walked in, tall, with a coat slightly wet from the rain. He nodded to the barista. "Usual?" she asked. He nodded again, sat by the window, and opened a small notebook. I watched as he wrote something, slowly, with focus. Every now and then he looked outside, then back to his page. "Who's that?" I whispered. She smiled faintly. "He comes every night, always sits there, never orders food, just coffee, always writes something down, about what? No one knows." There was something oddly peaceful about the scene. The quiet man, the jazz, the soft rain, everything fit together like an old photograph. "Do you get many people this late?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Writers, dreamers, people who can't sleep. People with stories they haven't told yet." That line stayed in my head. Stories they haven't told yet? The man with the notebook kept writing. The old couple finished their cake and left. The radio played Autumn Leaves, softly. The barista leaned against the counter and looked at me. "You seem like someone with a story too," she said. I smiled a little. "Maybe, but I'm not sure it's worth telling." "All stories are," she said quietly. "You just need the right night to tell them." We both looked toward the window. The rain was still falling, but lighter now. Reflections of streetlights rippled in puddles like broken glass. There was something magical about the way time moved there. slowly, like honey. I didn't check my phone, didn't think about work or messages. It was as if the world outside had paused. The man with the notebook closed it, paid for his coffee, and before leaving, said to the barista, "See you tomorrow." She nodded. He glanced at me briefly, his eyes calm, like he knew something I didn't. Then he disappeared into the rain. I turned to her. "He really comes every night." "Every night," she said, "like clockwork." "Why?" She shrugged. "Maybe he's waiting for something." There was a short silence. Then she added, "Or someone." The clock on the wall showed 2:47 a.m. The music had stopped. Only the sound of the rain remained. "Would you like another cup?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "Why not? I don't think I'm ready to sleep yet." As she poured the second cup, I realized I hadn't felt this calm in months. The night, the coffee, the silence. Everything felt like a quiet secret I had finally been allowed to enter. When I left, the rain had almost stopped. I turned around to look at the cafe one more time. The soft light glowing behind fogged windows, the signs still flickering. For a second, I thought I saw the man with the notebook standing inside again. But maybe it was just the reflection. As I walked away, I could still smell the coffee in the air. And somehow, I knew I would be back tomorrow night. The next night, I came back. It wasn't planned. At least, that's what I told myself. But something about that place had stayed with me all day. The smell of coffee, the quiet music, the calm face of the barista. At exactly 2:03 a.m., I was there again. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. The city looked half asleep, with only a few cars passing by. The cafe was glowing softly, like a lighthouse in the dark. I pushed the door open. Ting, the same sound, the same warm air. The barista looked up, smiled. "Back again?" "Yeah," I said. "Guess I couldn't stay away." She nodded knowingly. "Most people say that." There were fewer people tonight, just me, her, and the man with the notebook. He was sitting at the same table, by the window. His notebook open, pen moving slowly. I ordered the same thing, midnight blend. As she prepared it, I looked around. The jazz was softer tonight, a piano melody, slow and almost sad. When the coffee arrived, I sat at the counter again, but my eyes kept going back to that man. There was something about him, not mysterious in a cliché way, just quiet, like someone who carries too many thoughts. "Does he ever talk?" I asked the barista. "Sometimes," she said, "but only when it's raining." I laughed. "So I guess not tonight." She smiled. "Maybe not, but who knows?" A few minutes passed. Then the man closed his notebook, stood up, and walked toward the counter. He placed the notebook gently beside his cup and looked at me. "New face," he said. His voice was low, calm. "Yeah. I came here last night for the first time." He nodded. "People don't usually find this place by accident." I smiled faintly. "That's what she said." He didn't smile back, but his eyes softened a little. He took a sip of his coffee and said, "So, what brought you here? Can't sleep?" "Something like that," I said. "Too many thoughts, maybe." He nodded slowly. "That's the usual reason. Coffee at night isn't for staying awake. It's for not thinking too much while you're awake." That line hit deeper than I expected. He looked at me again, studying me for a moment, then said, "Do you write?" I hesitated. "No, not really." "Maybe you should," he said. "People who think too much usually have something worth writing." He turned his notebook toward me. On the open page were words written in small, neat handwriting. "Every night, the world gets quieter, and that's when you can finally hear yourself." "That's beautiful," I said. He shrugged. Just something I wrote when I couldn't sleep. He closed the notebook and stood there for a moment, looking out the window. Outside, a cat crossed the street, its shadow stretching under the dim light. Do you come here every night? I asked. He nodded. For almost a year now. Why, he thought for a second. Habit maybe, or hope. I'm not sure anymore. He finished his coffee, left a few coins on the counter, and said to the barista, "See you tomorrow, Maya." That was the first time I heard her name. "Good night, David," she said softly. When he left, I turned to her. "So, his name is David?" She nodded. "He's a writer. Or used to be. Used to be. He says he hasn't written anything worth reading in years. But he still comes here. Maybe to find inspiration." I looked at the door he had just walked through. Somehow, I already knew he'd be back tomorrow. And so would I. The next few nights became a rhythm. 2 a.m., same table, same faces. Sometimes David talked, sometimes not. One night he asked, "Do you ever wonder why people come to coffee shops late at night?" I said, "Maybe because they want to be alone, but not lonely." He smiled for the first time. That's exactly it. He opened his notebook and wrote that sentence down. Sometimes he shared small thoughts, half poems, fragments. Some people write to remember. Some write to forget. Coffee tastes different when you're thinking about someone. The night hides questions the day can't answer. It wasn't just writing, it felt like he was talking to himself, out loud. One night it started raining again, soft at first, then heavier, drops tapping the windows like a quiet rhythm. David looked outside and said, "You know, I used to come here with someone." "Who?" I asked. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "She loved the rain. She said it made the world softer." There was a pause. "Is she still around?" He shook his head. "No. She left a long time ago." He didn't explain more, and I didn't ask. Sometimes silence speaks better than words. Maya refilled his cup without saying anything. He gave her a small nod, like a thank you that didn't need to be spoken. After a while, he opened his notebook again and wrote, "Some people stay in your story, even when they leave your life." The jazz played a slow tune, blue and green. The clock showed 2:47 again, the same minute as the first night I came. I realized then that time in this cafe didn't move like everywhere else. It stretched and folded, turning nights into a single long moment. When David finally stood up to leave, he looked at me and said, "You'll write something one day." "About what?" He smiled faintly. "About the night you met a man who wouldn't stop writing." He left the notebook on the table. Maya picked it up, looked at the cover, then set it behind the counter. "He always leaves it here," she said. "Why?" "So he knows he'll have to come back." I looked at the shelf where the notebook now rested, beside an old coffee jar and a flickering candle. Somehow, it felt like the cafe was collecting stories, holding on to them for people who couldn't. I finished my cup slowly, listening to the rain, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't just awake, I was alive. The next morning arrived quietly. The city was still half asleep, wrapped in a light fog that blurred the edges of everything. The streets glistened with rain from the night before. Drops slid lazily down the cafe windows, catching the weak light of dawn. Inside the coffee shop, the air was still warm and filled with the faint smell of roasted beans from yesterday. Evelyn unlocked the door, her scarf wrapped tight around her neck. She took a deep breath before stepping in, letting the familiar scent wash over her. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the slight creak of the wooden floor, the chalkboard with yesterday's menu, all of it made her feel at home. She turned on the lights one by one, as if waking up an old friend. Moments later, Daniel entered. He looked different, a bit more tired, yet somehow lighter. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was the conversation they'd had the night before, about dreams, lost chances, and the strange ways life can pull people apart and back together. "Morning," he said softly, wiping his shoes at the door. "Morning," Evelyn replied with a small smile. "You're early. I couldn't sleep," he admitted, shrugging off his jacket. "Thought I'd come in and make the first coffee of the day." She handed him an apron. "Then you're in charge," he chuckled, moving behind the counter with ease. For a few quiet minutes, they didn't talk. The only sounds were the soft hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle rain outside, and the distant hum of the city waking up. When Daniel finally handed her a cup, she took a sip and closed her eyes. "Perfect," she murmured. He smiled. "Still got it." Around 8, the first customers started trickling in, the usuals. An old man with his crossword, a young woman typing furiously on her laptop, a couple whispering by the window. The shop began to breathe again, alive with quiet conversations and the clinking of cups. Outside, the rain softened into a mist. Evelyn leaned against the counter, watching it all. "It's strange," she said, "how this place never really changes." Daniel nodded. "That's why people come back. It feels like time slows down here." She thought about that, about how for years she had run the cafe like a clock, opening, serving, closing, repeating. But lately, she'd begun to feel like there was something missing, like she was waiting for something, though she didn't know what. Later that morning, a familiar sound cut through the quiet, the soft chime of the door and a gust of cold air. Evelyn looked up and froze. It was her, the woman who used to come in every Thursday, always with a book in hand and a sad smile. Clara. It had been nearly 2 years since she last saw her. Clara removed her umbrella, shaking off the raindrops. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes just as thoughtful. When she saw Evelyn, she hesitated, just for a moment, then smiled. "Still here," she said gently. "Always," Evelyn replied. They hugged, the kind of hug that carries both comfort and questions. Daniel, sensing the history between them, quietly stepped away to prepare another coffee. They sat by the window, the rain whispering softly outside. "So," Evelyn began, "how's life treating you?" Clara gave a small laugh. "Messy, beautiful, complicated. As always. Still writing, trying to," Clara said, tracing her finger on the rim of her cup. "But words don't come as easily these days." Evelyn nodded. "Maybe you're not supposed to chase them. Maybe they'll come back when it's time?" Clara smiled. "You always say things like that. Simple, but they stay with me." Meanwhile, Daniel watched them from behind the counter. There was something grounding about seeing people reconnect, especially in this place. It reminded him that cafes weren't really about coffee. They were about moments. Small, fragile, irreplaceable moments. He pulled out a napkin and began sketching something idly, the outline of a steaming cup, a raindrop, a window. When Evelyn walked back, she noticed it. "You still draw?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "When I don't know what else to do. Looks good." He smiled faintly. "It's nothing." But she knew it wasn't nothing. Daniel's sketches had always told stories. Quiet ones. Stories of people like them, tired, hopeful, always searching. By noon, the cafe was full. The doorbell kept ringing, the air buzzing softly with voices and laughter. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the clouds began to break apart, letting small patches of sunlight through. Evelyn leaned against the counter, watching everyone. For a brief moment, she felt it again. That peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Not the loud kind of happiness, but the still, deep one that sits quietly in your chest. Daniel caught her gaze and smiled. She smiled back. As the day went on, they worked in rhythm, brewing, serving, laughing. And though nothing extraordinary happened, it felt right. Sometimes, Evelyn thought, maybe that's what life really is. Not the big moments, but the small ones that keep repeating until they become the only kind that truly matter. When evening came, the cafe grew quiet again. Clara had left a small note by her cup. "Thank you for the calm." Evelyn held it for a long moment before slipping it into her apron pocket. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one, and somewhere between the fading rain and the hum of the espresso machine, the day slowly melted into night. It was late afternoon when he walked in. The air outside still smelled of rain, though the sky had finally cleared. Sunlight streamed through the big window, painting golden stripes across the tables. The cafe was half full, quiet conversations, the soft clinking of cups, the gentle hum of a jazz playlist. Evelyn was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine, when she noticed him. A man with a guitar case slung over his shoulder. His jacket was worn, his hair messy, but his eyes were calm, as if he had nowhere to rush. He looked around for a moment, then approached the counter. "One black coffee, please," he said, his voice low but steady. "Sure," Evelyn replied, smiling. "Long day," he nodded. "You could say that. I just needed a quiet place." She handed him his coffee. "Then you found it." He took a seat in the corner, near the window. The light caught the edge of his guitar case, revealing a few faded stickers, small cities, music festivals, a tiny heart with wings. Evelyn found herself glancing at him now and then, wondering who he was, where he'd played before, and why he carried that kind of stillness, the kind that only comes from long roads and lonely nights. An hour passed. The customers began to leave, one by one, until the cafe grew calm again. The golden light outside turned softer, deeper. Daniel came from the back, drying his hands on a towel. "Quiet evening," he said. "Yeah," Evelyn replied, "but I don't mind." Daniel followed her gaze to the corner. "Traveler?" "Looks like it," she said. "Has that air?" They went about their closing routine, refilling jars, cleaning tables. And then, without warning, the man stood up, opened his guitar case, and began to tune the strings. The soft pluck of each note echoed through the cafe, gentle and warm. Evelyn looked up, surprised. Daniel paused mid-step. He played a few slow chords, testing the sound. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Then he began to play a song, slow, wistful, carried by the weight of memory. It wasn't a song anyone recognized, but it felt familiar, like something you'd heard long ago, in another life. His voice joined the melody, deep, rough, honest. For a few minutes, the whole cafe stopped. The world outside, the cars, the wind, the noise, faded away. There was only the music, the smell of coffee, and the low hum of emotion in the air. When he finished, he didn't look up right away. He just exhaled, quietly, as if releasing something he'd been carrying for too long. Then he smiled, softly, to himself. "That was beautiful," Evelyn said. He looked at her finally. "Thanks. I just needed to play it somewhere." "Was it your song?" Daniel asked. The man nodded. "Yeah, I wrote it years ago. Haven't played it in a while." He sat back down, wrapping his fingers around the warm cup. Evelyn came closer. "Do you travel a lot?" "Used to," he said. "Now I just wonder." "Big difference?" He smiled faintly. "Traveling means you have a destination. Wandering means you don't." Evelyn liked that. It sounded sad but free at the same time. She poured him a refill on the house. "Then here's to wandering." He raised his cup in a quiet toast. To places like this, where time slows down. They talked for a while. Not much, just pieces of stories. The kind you share when you know you might never meet again. He told them about nights playing under dim streetlights, about songs written on napkins, and forgotten bars where people actually listened. Daniel listened closely. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Every day," the man said. "But some things you can't live inside forever. Music, it's like the rain. It comes and goes when it wants." The rain had indeed returned outside, tapping softly against the window. Evelyn smiled at the timing. When it grew darker, the man stood up. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, tightening the strap on his guitar case. "And for listening." "Will you come back?" Evelyn asked. He paused at the door. "Maybe. If the road leads me here again." And then he was gone, out into the misty evening, disappearing among the street lights. After he left, the café felt different, like it had absorbed his song. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of echoes, warmth, and a strange kind of calm. Daniel turned to Evelyn. "You think he plays like that everywhere he goes?" Evelyn nodded. "Maybe that's his way of leaving something behind." Later that night, when the café was closed and the lights were dim, Evelyn found a folded piece of paper under the table where he'd sat. It was a lyric sheet. The handwriting was rough, hurried, but clear. At the bottom, one line stood out. "If you find peace, play this song again." Evelyn read it twice, then placed it near the register, beside the tips jar. The next morning, when the first rays of light entered the coffee shop, the paper was still there. A quiet reminder of a stranger who had come, played one song, and left something far greater behind than just music. It was one of those nights when the rain wouldn't stop. The sound of water against the glass blended with the quiet jazz that played from the old speaker near the counter. Evelyn stood behind it, gently polishing a cup that didn't really need polishing. It was late, almost closing time, but she liked staying open a little longer on rainy nights. The cafe always felt different then, more alive somehow. Daniel had gone home early, and the street outside was empty. She thought she'd close soon, until the door opened. A man stepped in, soaked from head to toe. He wasn't young, maybe in his 40s, with tired eyes and an old brown coat. He paused for a moment, looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. Evelyn smiled softly. "Rough night?" He gave a small nod. "You could say that." "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not," she said. "Anywhere you like." He took a seat near the window, where raindrops slid down in silver lines. When Evelyn brought him a cup of hot coffee, he wrapped his hands around it, as though it were the only warm thing left in his world. "Thank you," he murmured. "No problem," she said. "You look like you've been walking for a while." He gave a faint smile. "You could say I've been walking for years." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe was silent, except for the rain, the hum of the fridge, and the occasional creak of wood. Then, without looking up, the man said quietly, "Do you ever feel like you've lived too many lives in one lifetime?" Evelyn blinked. "Sometimes," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" He sipped his coffee. "Because I think I've had 3. He looked out the window, as if the rain might show him memories. "The first," he began, "was when I was young. I wanted to be a writer. I thought stories could fix people, heal them even. So I wrote everything I felt. Love, hope, anger, dreams, all of it. But words aren't enough when the world around you doesn't read." He smiled bitterly. "So I stopped." Evelyn listened quietly, her hands resting on the counter. "The second life," he continued, was when I thought I needed money more than meaning. I worked, I built things, I bought things, I lost things. You know how it goes. But one day I realized I'd built a house and forgotten who was supposed to live in it. He looked at her then, his eyes calm but distant. And the third? Well, that's this one. The life after everything's already happened. The one where you just walk. Evelyn's heart felt heavier with every word. Why walk? She asked softly. Because sitting still feels worse, he said. When you move, at least you don't hear the echoes as loud. He smiled, not sadly, but knowingly. There was something strange about him, something familiar and yet unreal, like someone from a dream that refuses to fade when you wake. He told her stories, small ones, like fragments of forgotten memories, about the woman he almost married but didn't, about a friend who played the piano on rooftops at night, about the dog that followed him across 2 cities, about how he once saw the ocean at dawn and felt, for a brief second, completely understood. Each story felt unfinished, like a melody that ends mid-note. And yet, they all carried something deep and true. After a while, Evelyn poured him another cup. On the house, she said. He smiled. You shouldn't give things for free. It's not free, she said. You're paying with stories. He chuckled quietly. Then I suppose I'm rich again. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the rain softened into a mist. The clock ticked softly behind the counter. Then, almost as if to himself, he whispered, I used to come here. A long time ago. Evelyn frowned slightly. Really? I don't remember you. You wouldn't, he said, smiling faintly. It wasn't this café. Not exactly, but it looked like it. Same smell. Same light. Same feeling? He took another sip, then stared into his cup. Places like this. They don't belong to time. They belong to people who need them. Evelyn didn't know what to say. There was something in his words that felt too real to be random. Where are you going next? She asked. He looked toward the window, where the rain had stopped completely. The city lights blurred through the glass, soft and golden. I don't know, he said. Maybe nowhere. Maybe home. If I can find it. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone told her not to. He stood up slowly, setting a few coins on the counter. For the coffee, he said. Keep it, she replied. Really? He nodded, smiling again. A tired, grateful smile. And then, before leaving, he said one last thing. Thank you for listening. That's rarer than kindness. The doorbell chimed softly as he stepped out. Evelyn turned to wipe the counter, but when she looked back, he was gone. Not down the street, not across the road, just gone. Like the fog had swallowed him whole. She went to the door, looked outside. Nothing. Only the sound of dripping water from the rooftops and the faint hum of the city. When she turned back, she noticed his cup was still half full. Steam still rose from it, as if he'd only just left. Something about that made her pause. She reached for the coins he'd left, 3 of them, but they were cold. Colder than they should have. She stood there for a long time, the sound of rain returning softly in the distance. When Daniel came in the next morning, she told him about the man. He smiled, half amused, half curious. You sure you weren't dreaming, Eve? I don't think so, she said. He was real. He even told me his story. Daniel poured himself a coffee. Well, I guess everyone who walks through that door has one... Yeah, Evelyn murmured. But not everyone disappears. Later that day, when she cleaned the table where he'd sat, she noticed something under his cup. A napkin, with a line written in neat handwriting. If you remember me, then maybe I was real. She smiled. a little confused, a little sad, and folded the napkin carefully, placing it beside the old lyric sheet left by the guitar player. And that night, as the cafe lights dimmed and the rain began again, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder. Maybe the coffee shop was more than just a cafe. Maybe it was a place where stories came to rest. Before moving on, the rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Not hard, not violent, just constant. A quiet rhythm that wrapped the city in silver. People outside hurried under umbrellas, their reflections blurring in puddles. But inside the coffee shop, time seemed to move differently. Softer, slower, as if the rain had its own heartbeat and everyone inside was breathing in sync with it. Evelyn stood by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. Each one carried the faint glow of the streetlights outside. She'd always liked the rain. It made people stay longer. It made silence feel full. Daniel was behind the counter, making 2 cappuccinos, the steam curling up like ghosts of thoughts. "You ever notice," he said, "how when it rains people talk quieter?" Evelyn smiled faintly. Maybe the rain's loud enough for everyone. He handed her a cup, foam perfect. Or maybe it just makes people remember things they'd rather forget. She took a sip, thinking, yeah, maybe both. The cafe was half full. Students, couples, a writer typing by the wall, and an older man sketching something in a notebook. The soft chatter mixed with the rain outside like a gentle melody. In one corner, a little girl pressed her hand against the window, tracing the path of a raindrop with her finger. Her mother smiled, lost in her own thoughts. Evelyn found herself watching them for a long moment. There was something simple and beautiful about it. "Do you remember," Daniel asked suddenly, "the first rain after we opened this place?" Evelyn laughed quietly. "Of course. We had 3 customers. One of them just came in to get out of the storm and stayed for 4 hours," Daniel said. "Yeah," she nodded. He said the rain made the coffee taste better. They both laughed softly, though the memory carried a strange sweetness. A reminder of how much time had passed. There was a pause. The kind of pause that feels like a breath between thoughts. Then Evelyn said softly, "You ever think about how time works here? Like, the outside world moves fast, but this place doesn't. Some people come in, and it's like they've stepped out of time completely." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's strange. Sometimes I feel like this cafe remembers things even when we don't." She turned to him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "You know, the air, the walls, the smell of coffee. Maybe they hold pieces of people, like echoes. Every laugh, every song, every goodbye." Evelyn thought about the napkins she'd kept, the ones left behind by the guitar player and the stranger. Maybe he was right. Maybe the cafe was collecting lives. Quietly, gently, without asking for anything in return. Hours passed. The rain didn't stop. People came and went, wet coats, soft smiles, tired eyes, each one leaving a trace. As the evening grew deeper, the lights dimmed and the cafe emptied. Only the writer remained, a young woman with headphones, typing softly on her laptop. Evelyn refilled her cup without a word. "You write in the rain?" Evelyn asked. The woman smiled. "Always. The sound helps me think." "About what?" "About how nothing ever really ends," she said. "It just changes shape." Evelyn looked at her for a moment, surprised. "That's beautiful." The woman shrugged lightly. "Just something my mother used to say." When she finally left, the cafe fell silent again. Only the sound of rain remained. Daniel had already gone home. Evelyn was alone. She walked slowly around the room, collecting cups, turning chairs, wiping tables. Every sound echoed softly. Wood, glass, fabric, rain. It was peaceful, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still there. Maybe it was just the stories. Sitting quietly in the air, she turned off the lights, one by one. The only glow came from the street lamp outside, shimmering through the rain-covered window. She stood there for a while, staring out, lost in thought. What is time, really? She wondered. A circle, a line, or just rain, falling the same forever while everything else changes. The thought stayed with her. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "The rain never stops. Maybe that's the point." And with that, she locked the door, left the key in the drawer, and stepped outside. The sound of rain welcomed her like an old friend. For a brief moment, she tilted her face up to the sky, eyes closed, listening. The city lights blurred behind her, the coffee shop glowing faintly through the window. Then she walked away, her footsteps blending into the rhythm of the rain. Another story, quietly moving through time. The day began slowly. The sky was pale gray, the kind that promised another long stretch of rain. The coffee shop opened at 7, just as it always did, and the familiar smell of roasted beans filled the air. The barista moved quietly, setting cups on the counter, adjusting chairs, lighting the small lamp by the window. Outside, the streets glistened, slick and reflective. It was the kind of morning when time itself seemed tired, when everything moved softer, quieter, as if the world had just woken up and wasn't ready to start yet. The first few customers came and went. Students with headphones, a man reading the newspaper, an old lady who always ordered the same cappuccino and smiled without saying much. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, until he noticed the letter. It was lying on a corner table by the window, next to an empty cup that someone must have left behind. The letter was simple. No envelope, just folded paper, slightly wrinkled, the edges soft, as if it had been carried around for a long time. He almost didn't notice it, but something about the way it caught the light, just enough to reveal a few faded words on the front, made him stop. "To you." 2 words. Nothing else. He looked around the shop. No one seemed to be searching for it. The man with the newspaper had already left. The couple in the corner were lost in conversation. The sound of milk steaming filled the air again. He picked up the letter, turning it in his hands. It felt light, fragile, like a small secret someone had decided to let go of. He hesitated for a moment, then unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, almost shy. The ink had bled a little with time, but the words were still clear. If you're reading this, maybe you've been waiting too. Waiting for something you can't name. I used to sit by the same window every morning, watching the rain fall, hoping to see a face I once knew. But people change. Time changes us. Sometimes all that's left is the place where we used to be. He paused. The café was silent now, except for the quiet rain tapping against the glass. The letter continued. If you've ever waited for someone who didn't come back, know this, you're not alone. There's comfort in knowing that strangers carry the same kind of ache, even if we never meet. So, whoever you are, maybe this letter found the right hands. He read it twice, then again. Something about those words felt personal, too close to ignore. He thought about his own mornings, how he came here before sunrise, how the same few faces came and went, and how, sometimes, when he wiped the counter, he'd glance at the door without meaning to. Maybe he too was waiting for someone. He folded the letter again, slowly. Then he placed it in his apron pocket, unsure why. Maybe he'd keep it for a while. Maybe not. Hours passed. The cafe filled and emptied, as it always did. The rain never stopped. It just changed its rhythm, sometimes soft, sometimes loud, like breathing. In the afternoon, a young woman walked in. She looked like she'd been caught in the rain. Damp hair, a heavy coat, a book tucked under her arm. She ordered tea and sat at the same window table. The very same one. The barista brought her drink, smiled politely, and almost mentioned the letter, but something stopped him. She looked like someone who was also waiting. When she left, she forgot something too, a small bookmark made from a movie ticket. He smiled faintly. It felt familiar now. This pattern of people leaving behind tiny pieces of themselves. It said, "If you find this, write something back." He looked around, half expecting someone to be there, but the cafe was empty. Only the dim lamps glowed, casting soft shadows on the tables. He grabbed a pen. For a while he just stared at the blank side of the page, unsure what to say. Then, slowly, he began to write, "I found your letter today. It was raining, like you said. I don't know who you are, or when you wrote this, but it felt real. I think we've all been waiting for something, or someone. Maybe the person you were waiting for never came, but maybe someone else will. I'll leave this letter where I found it, for the next one who needs it." He signed nothing, just folded it again and placed it back on the same table by the window. And in that moment, he felt something shift, quiet but deep, like the cafe itself had exhaled. The next morning, the letter was gone. No one knew who took it. The barista didn't ask, but he liked to think it found the next person it was meant for. Someone lost in thought. Someone looking for meaning in a cup of coffee on a rainy day. Days turned into weeks, and the letter became a quiet story among the regulars. They'd whisper about it. "Did you hear? Someone found a love letter in the cafe." Some said it was from years ago, written by a traveler who never returned. Others believed it was part of a book that someone left behind. But the truth stayed between the walls, in the air thick with the scent of espresso and memory. One evening, just before closing, a man came in, older, tired, with eyes that had seen too much of the world. He ordered nothing. He just stood near the window for a while, looking at the table, the same one. Then he smiled, faintly, and whispered to himself, "It's still here." The barista wanted to ask, but the man had already turned to leave. Outside, the rain had started again. Steady, endless, the kind that blurs the world into soft watercolors. The neon sign of the cafe flickered in reflection. He locked up for the night, turned off the lights, and stood there in the quiet glow of the street lamp. The empty table by the window waited, as if expecting something new. Maybe another letter, maybe another story, maybe just silence. The kind that says everything without a single word. The barista smiled and whispered into the empty room, "Good night." And for a moment, it felt like the cafe smiled back. The city was still asleep. For the first time in weeks, there was no rain, only a soft mist hanging low over the streets, wrapping the lamps in halos of light. The sky was pale, the color of milk, slowly warming to gold as dawn began to push away the night. The barista unlocked the door to the cafe earlier than usual. The air outside was cool, almost fragile. He could hear the faint sound of a newspaper truck in the distance, the hum of electricity in the streetlights, and the rhythmic tapping of his own footsteps on the pavement. Inside, everything waited exactly as it always did. The tables, the chairs, the smell of yesterday's coffee lingering like memory. He switched on the lights, 1, 2, 3, and the cafe came alive in soft amber tones. Steam rose from the espresso machine. The first notes of quiet jazz played through the speakers. It was, somehow, a sacred hour. He'd never seen the café at this time. Usually, when he arrived, the sun had already climbed higher and the day had already begun. But this moment between night and morning, felt different. Still, he made himself a cup of coffee, not out of habit, but because he wanted to watch it brew. The sound of it, the low hiss, the slow drip, felt like the heartbeat of the place. He took a seat by the window. For once, the world outside didn't rush anywhere. The streets were empty, except for a cat crossing the road and a bus parked quietly at the corner. He took a sip. The coffee was hot, strong, a little bitter, the way he liked it. He breathed in deeply, letting the warmth fill his chest. The same table, the same window. But somehow, everything was new. He thought about the letter again. That letter, the one that had appeared and vanished like a dream. He still didn't know who left it or who took it, but he'd stopped wondering. Maybe that was the point, not knowing. Life, he realized, wasn't about answers. It was about moments like this, small, unremarkable, yet perfectly complete. The bell above the door rang softly. He looked up. It was too early for customers. But there she was, the young woman who had once left behind a bookmark made from a movie ticket. She smiled when their eyes met. "Too early for coffee?" he asked with a quiet laugh. "Never too early," she said. Her voice matched the morning, calm, almost whisper-like. She took her usual seat by the window, the one where the letter had once rested. He made her coffee. No need to ask what she wanted, and brought it over. "You open earlier now?" she asked. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Wanted to see what the world looks like before it wakes up." She smiled, looking out the window. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Peaceful. Like the city's holding its breath." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the sky was turning pink, the light touching the wet rooftops, and the fog lifting slowly, like curtains parting in a theater. He noticed how the sunlight caught her hair, how it reflected softly in her cup, and how, in that small, quiet moment, everything felt almost right. "Do you ever feel," she said suddenly, "like mornings are, promises, like every sunrise is a chance to begin again?" He looked down at his coffee, thought for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, like no matter how much you've lost, the sun still rises anyway." She smiled again, but this time it reached her eyes. They didn't talk much after that. Words weren't needed. The morning itself was enough. When she left, she placed something on the table, a small napkin folded in half. He didn't notice until after she was gone. On it, a few words were written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for opening early today. I needed this morning." He read it twice, smiling quietly to himself. Then he looked outside. The city had woken up. Cars, footsteps, voices, but the peace of that early hour still lingered, like a secret the world had already forgotten. He placed the napkin next to the coffee machine, beside the collection of small things left behind by others. The old letter, the bookmark, a coin from a traveler, a drawing from a child, a quiet museum of moments. By noon, the café was full. The rhythm of the day returned, cups clinking, laughter, the rush of orders. But behind it all, there was a steady calm, the kind only a quiet morning can leave behind. That night, when he closed the shop, he stood again by the window. The street was glowing softly under the lamps, and the moon hung low, silver and slow. He whispered, "See you in the morning," though he didn't know to whom. Maybe to the café, maybe to her, maybe to the quiet itself. And as he turned off the lights, the air felt alive again, not with noise, but with the memory of silence. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing about a new day isn't the sunrise itself. It's the moment before it, when the world is still deciding to begin. The cafe opened to a cool wind that morning. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried its scent, that earthy freshness that comes after a long night of storms. The barista wiped the windows clean, letting the sunlight fall through. It was brighter than usual, but softer too, as if even the light had learned to whisper in this place. It was the kind of morning that looked ordinary, but felt different. The kind that hints, quietly, that something is about to change. He noticed it when he saw the suitcase. It was sitting near the door beside the usual corner table, a worn-out leather case with travel stickers faded from time and distance. And sitting next to it, stirring his coffee slowly, was Mr. Bennett, one of the cafe's oldest regulars. He'd been coming here for years, always at the same time, always with the same order: black coffee, no sugar. He'd sit there with his notebook, reading or sketching, rarely speaking unless spoken to. But when he did, his words always felt deliberate, like each one was weighed before leaving his lips. This morning, though, he looked different. Not sad, exactly, just quieter than usual. The barista smiled and approached. "Morning, Mr. Bennett." The man looked up, returning a gentle smile. "Morning. You heading somewhere?" he asked, glancing at the suitcase. Bennett nodded. "Back home. After 15 years, it's time." The barista leaned on the counter. 15 years is a long time. "You'll miss this place." The man looked around. The soft lights, the wood tables, the faint sound of jazz humming from the speakers. "I already do," he said softly. For a while, neither spoke. The barista refilled his cup without asking. The man took a sip, eyes distant. "You know," Bennett began, "when I first came here, I didn't plan to stay. It was just a stop between things, a place to catch my breath. Then somehow, this cafe became part of my days. The quiet, the faces, even the sound of that damn coffee grinder." He began to prepare it. Slow, careful, as if every movement mattered. The grind, the pour, the gentle swirl of crema. He added a touch more warmth to the milk, not because it changed the taste, but because it felt right. When he placed the cup in front of Bennett, it wasn't just coffee. It was a memory in liquid form. Bennett looked at it for a long moment before speaking. "You know what's funny? Every cup I've had here, I never remembered the taste, only the feeling." The barista smiled. "That's how you know it's real," Bennett chuckled quietly. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "Do you ever think coffee remembers us too?" The barista blinked. "What do you mean?" He leaned back. "Every morning, thousands of people drink coffee. Different lives, different reasons. But that same warmth passes through each of them. The same ritual, the same comfort. Maybe coffee is just the universe's way of saying, you're not alone." The barista liked that thought. It felt like something that should be written on the wall somewhere. When Bennett finished the cup, he left the empty mug on the table, just like always. But this time, he also placed something beside it. A small, folded note. He stood, adjusted his coat, and turned toward the door. The barista called out softly, "Take care, Mr. Bennett." The man smiled over his shoulder. "I will. And don't change the music. It's perfect just the way it is." The bell above the door rang one last time, and then he was gone. The cafe felt heavier without him. Even though nothing had really changed, the music still played. The coffee still steamed. The chairs still creaked. But there was a quiet gap now, an invisible absence that only those who had been there long enough could feel The barista finally picked up the note. On it, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Every goodbye is just another way of saying thank you." No signature, just that single line. He placed it next to the napkin the young woman had once left, beside the bookmark, the coin, the drawing, and the old letter. A growing collection of human moments, stitched together by caffeine and time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, he made himself one last cup for the day, the same blend he'd made for Bennett that morning. He sat by the window, looking at the street glowing in orange light. He raised the cup slightly, as if in a silent toast, to the ones who came, to the ones who left. The coffee tasted the same as always, but somehow it meant more. Outside, a train passed in the distance, its sound low and fading. Somewhere, Mr. Bennett was probably watching the same sky, holding his own cup, remembering the café just as the café remembered him. The barista thought about how many goodbyes had happened in this place. Quiet, gentle, unspoken ones. Maybe that was what gave it its soul. Not the coffee, not the lights, not even the people, but the moments when they said farewell and still left a piece of themselves behind. He looked at the shelves again. There they were, the relics of lives intersecting for brief seconds. A museum with no visitors, no explanations, just meaning. He turned off the lights, one by one. The glow from the street outside spilled across the floor like a final brushstroke. And for a brief, golden moment before the darkness settled, the café felt full again, as if everyone who had ever sat there was still sitting somewhere within its walls. He whispered, softly, almost to himself, "See you tomorrow." And the café, silent and patient as always, seemed to answer back, in the quiet hum of the night, in the warmth that lingered in the air, in the faint memory of the goodbye cup. The barista finally picked up the note. On it, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Every goodbye is just another way of saying thank you." No signature, just that single line. He placed it next to the napkin the young woman had once left, beside the bookmark, the coin, the drawing, and the old letter. A growing collection of human moments, stitched together by caffeine and time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, he made himself one last cup for the day, the same blend he'd made for Bennett that morning. He sat by the window, looking at the street glowing in orange light. He raised the cup slightly, as if in a silent toast, to the ones who came, to the ones who left. The coffee tasted the same as always, but somehow it meant more. Outside, a train passed in the distance, its sound low and fading. Somewhere, Mr. Bennett was probably watching the same sky, holding his own cup, remembering the café just as the café remembered him. The barista thought about how many goodbyes had happened in this place. Quiet, gentle, unspoken ones. Maybe that was what gave it its soul. Not the coffee, not the lights, not even the people, but the moments when they said farewell and still left a piece of themselves behind. He looked at the shelves again. There they were. The relics of lives intersecting for brief seconds. A museum with no visitors, no explanations, just meaning. He turned off the lights, one by one. The glow from the street outside spilled across the floor like a final brushstroke. And for a brief golden moment before the darkness settled, the café felt full again, as if everyone who had ever sat there was still sitting somewhere within its walls. He whispered, softly, almost to himself, "See you tomorrow." And the café, silent and patient as always, seemed to answer back, in the quiet hum of the night, in the warmth that lingered in the air, in the faint memory of the goodbye cup. The night was quieter than usual. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the streets washed clean, glistening under the amber glow of street lamps. The cafe was still open, though no one had come in for a long time. Only the sound of the clock on the wall, slow, patient, filled the silence. The barista stood behind the counter, polishing a cup that was already spotless. It was late, too late for customers, too early to close. Outside, the world was asleep. Inside, it felt like time itself had decided to rest for a while. He looked around. Every corner of the cafe carried a memory. The table where the letter had once been found. The chair by the window where the young woman used to read. The counter where Mr. Bennet had left his note. All of them still there, empty but alive in a quiet way. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the last one for the night. The steam curled slowly upward, dancing in the low light. He didn't add sugar, didn't stir, just held it, feeling the warmth in his hands. There was something about nights like this, when the world outside fades into darkness and only your thoughts remain. It was in those moments he'd always found himself here, in this cafe. Every night, after closing, just sitting, listening, thinking, but tonight felt different. Final. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe because of the letter, or the rain that had finally stopped, or the silence that now felt complete. But deep down, he understood something had reached its end. He sat by the window, the same seat where so many stories had unfolded. Love, loss, waiting, beginnings, goodbyes. He looked at his reflection in the glass, faint and ghost-like against the dark city beyond. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, as if talking to the cafe itself, he whispered, "I think I understand now." He thought back to when he first came here, years ago. Back then, he wasn't a barista. He was just someone looking for a place to escape the noise of his own mind. He'd come in one rainy evening, tired, lost, searching for something he couldn't name. The owner, an older woman with calm eyes, had made him a coffee and told him, "Sometimes all people need is a place to sit and breathe." When she retired, she left him the cafe. "Keep it open," she'd said. "Someone out there will need it," and so he did. Night after night, he opened the doors, served cups of warmth to strangers who carried stories heavier than words. He never asked too many questions. He just listened to their voices, their silences, their sighs between sips. Some stayed for minutes, some stayed for years, and all of them, in their own way, left something behind. That was it. That was what he'd been doing all along. He hadn't just been serving coffee. He'd been holding space for others, for himself, for all the quiet moments that didn't fit anywhere else. He looked at the counter again, at the little collection of objects he'd gathered over time. The napkin with the thank you note, the coin, the drawing, the letter marked to you. All of them fragments of human connection. Tiny proofs that people had been here, that they'd existed, that their stories had brushed against his, if only for a moment. He smiled faintly. He took a sip of his coffee. It was cooler now, almost gone, but the taste lingered, deep, comforting, familiar. The wind outside carried the sound of the distant city, a car passing, a dog barking, the faint hum of life continuing somewhere else. Inside, it was still. He stood, walked over to the door, and flipped the sign from open to closed. Then he turned off the lights. One by one, the cafe fell into shadows, except for the soft glow of the street lamp through the window. He sat down again, in the half-dark. He realized he wasn't sad. He didn't feel lonely either. He felt complete. Everything. The rain, the people, the conversations, even the silences, had led him here. To this moment, he understood now that the café was never about coffee. It was about time, the time people needed to find themselves again, and maybe that was why he kept coming back. Not because he loved the work, but because he too had needed a place to sit and breathe. He looked around one last time. The walls, the tables, the shelves, they all seemed to breathe with him. Quiet, peaceful, alive, he whispered. Thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to everything. Then, almost without thinking, he took the old letter from the shelf, the one that had started it all, and unfolded it. The ink was faded now, but the words were still there. If you're reading this, maybe you've been waiting too. He smiled softly. Not anymore. He placed the letter back, but this time he added his own line beneath it. Sometimes waiting is just another way of listening. He folded it carefully and left it on the table by the window, the same place it had always belonged. Outside, the first light of dawn began to show, faint, silver, stretching across the street. Another morning was coming, quiet and new. He stood, finished the last sip of his coffee, and walked to the door. Before stepping out, he turned once more to look at the café. Empty, yet full. Silent, yet alive. Like a heart that keeps beating long after the world has gone to sleep. He turned off the sign completely this time. The glow faded, leaving only the reflection of the city waking up. He stepped into the cool air. The sky was turning from gray to gold. Somewhere, birds began to sing. He breathed deeply, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was carrying it with him. The warmth, the silence, the stories, all of it. He smiled, whispered one last time, not to the café, not to anyone, but to the moment itself. Good night. And as he walked away, the world seemed to pause, just for a second, as if listening. Then the day began.